Good morning, Mr. Daldis here with your Chapter 18, Section 3 reading, Radical Days of the Revolution. In 1793, the Revolution entered a radical phase. For a year, France experienced one of the bloodiest regimes in its long history as determined leaders sought to extend and preserve the Revolution. The monarchy is abolished. As the Revolution continued, dismal news about the war abroad heightened tensions. Well-trained Prussian forces were cutting down raw French recruits. In addition, royalist officers were deserting the French army, joining emerges, and others hoping to restore the king's power. Tensions lead to violence. Battle disasters quickly inflamed revolutionaries who thought the king was in league with the enemies. On August 10, 1792, a crowd of Parisians stormed the royal palace of the Tuileries and slaughtered the king's guards. The royal family fled to the Legislative Assembly, escaping before the mob arrived. A month later, citizens attacked prisons that held nobles and priests accused of political offenses. About 1,200 prisoners were killed. Among them were many ordinary criminals. Historians disagree about the people who carried out the September massacres. Some called them bloodthirsty mobs, others described them as patriots defending France from its enemies. In fact, most were ordinary citizens fired to fury by real and imagined grievances. Radicals take control and execute the king. Backed by Paris crowds, radicals then took control of the assembly. Radicals called for the election of a new legislative body called the National Convention. Suffrage, the right to vote, was to be extended to all male citizens, not just to property owners. The convention that met in September 1792 was a more radical body than earlier assemblies. It voted to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic, the French Republic. Deputies then drew up a new constitution for France. The Jacobins, who controlled the convention, set out to erase all traces of the old order. They seized lands of nobles and abolished titles of nobility. During the early months of the Republic, the convention also put Louis XVI on trial as a traitor to France. The king was convicted by a single vote and sentenced to death. On a foggy morning in January 1793, Louis mounted a scaffold in a public square in Paris. He started to speak, "Frenchmen, I die innocent. I pardon the authors of my death. I pray God that the blood about to be spilt will never fall upon the head of France." Then the roll of the drums drowned out his words. Moments later, the king was beheaded. The executioner lifted the king's head by its hair and held it before the crowd. In October, Marie Antoinette was also executed. The popular press celebrated her death. The queen, however, showed great dignity as she went to her death. What occurred after radicals took control of the assembly? Terror and danger gripped France. By early 1793, danger threatened France on all sides. The country was at war with much of Europe, including Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, and Prussia. In the Vendée region of France, royalists and priests led peasants in rebellion against the government. In Paris, the sans-culottes demanded relief from food shortages and inflation. The convention itself was bitterly divided between Jacobins and a rival group, the Girondins. The convention creates a new committee. To deal with the threats to France, the convention created the Committee of Public Safety. The 12-member committee had almost absolute power as it battled to save the revolution. The committee prepared France for all-out war, issuing a levy allemand, or mass levy tax, that required all citizens to contribute to the war effort. In addition, the 12 members of the committee were in charge of trials and executions. Spurred by revolutionary fervor, French recruits marched off to defend the Republic. Young officers developed effective new tactics to win battles with masses of ill-trained but patriotic forces. Soon, French armies overran the Netherlands. They later invaded Italy. At home, they crushed peasant revolts. European monarchs shuddered as the revolutionaries carried freedom fever into conquered lands. Robespierre, the Incorruptible. At home, the government battled counter-revolutionaries under the guiding hand of Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre, a shrewd lawyer and politician, quickly rose to the leadership of the Committee of Public Safety. Among Jacobins, his selfless dedication to the revolution earned him the nickname the Incorruptible. The enemies of Robespierre called him a tyrant. Robespierre had embraced Rousseau's idea of the general will as the source of all legitimate law. He promoted religious toleration and wanted to abolish slavery. Though cold and humorless, he was popular with the sans-culottes, who hated the old regime as much as he did. He believed that France could achieve a republic of virtue only through the use of terror, which he coolly defined as nothing more than prompt, severe, inflexible justice. Liberty cannot be secured, Robespierre cried, unless criminals lose their heads. The guillotine defines the Reign of Terror. Robespierre was one of the chief architects of the Reign of Terror, which lasted from September 1793 to July of 1794. Revolutionary courts conducted hasty trials. Spectators greeted death sentences with cries of "Hail the Republic" or "Death to the traitors." In a speech given on February 5, 1794, Robespierre explained why the terror was necessary to achieve the goals of the revolution. It is necessary to stifle the domestic and foreign enemies of the Republic, or perish with them. The first maxim of our politics ought to be to lead the people by means of reason, and the enemies of the people by terror. If the basis of popular government in time of peace is virtue, the basis of popular government in time of revolution is both virtue and terror. End quote. Suspect were those who resisted the revolution. About 300,000 were arrested during the Reign of Terror. 17,000 were executed. Many were victims of mistaken identity or were falsely accused by their neighbors. Many more were packed into hideous prisons, where death from disease was common. The engine of the terror was the guillotine. Its fast-falling blade extinguished life instantly. A member of the legislature, Dr. Joseph Guillotin, had introduced it as a more humane method of beheading than the uncertain axe, but the guillotine quickly became a symbol of horror. Within a year, the terror consumed those who initiated it. Weary of the bloodshed and fearing for their own lives, members of the convention turned on the Committee of Public Safety. On the night of July 27, 1794, Robespierre was arrested. The next day, he was executed. After the heads of Robespierre and other radicals fell, executions slowly fell dramatically. Checkpoint. Why did Robespierre think the terror was necessary to achieve the goals of revolution? The revolution enters its third stage. In reaction to the terror, the revolution entered a third stage. Moving away from the excesses of the convention, moderates produced another constitution, the third since 1789. The Constitution of 1795 set up a 5-man directory and a 2-house legislature elected by male citizens of property. The middle class and professional people of the bourgeoisie were the dominant force during this stage of the French Revolution. The Directory held power from 1795 to 1799. Weak but dictatorial, the Directory faced growing discontent. Peace was made with Prussia and Spain, but war with Austria and Great Britain continued. Corrupt leaders lined their pockets, but failed to solve pressing problems. When rising bread prices stirred hungry sans-culottes to riot, the Directory quickly suppressed them. Another threat to the Directory was the revival of royalist feeling. Many emergés were returning to France, and devout Catholics, who resented measures that had been taken against the Church, were welcoming them. In the elections of 1797, supporters of a constitutional monarchy won the majority of the seats in the legislature. As chaos threatened, politicians turned to Napoleon Bonaparte, a popular military hero who had won a series of brilliant victories against the Austrians in Italy. The politicians planned to use him to advance their own goals. To their dismay, however, before long, Napoleon would outwit all of them to become ruler of France. Checkpoint. What changes occurred after the Reign of Terror came to an end? Revolution brings change. By 1799, the 10-year-old French Republic had dramatically changed France. It had dislodged the old social order, overthrown the monarchy, and brought the church under state control. New symbols such as the red liberty caps and tricolor confirmed the liberty and equality of all male citizens. The new title citizen applied to people of all social classes. All other titles were eliminated. Before he was executed, Louis XVI was called Citizen Capet, from the name of the dynasty that had ruled France in the Middle Ages. Elaborate fashions and powdered wigs gave way to the practical clothes and simple haircuts of the sans-culotte. Nationalism spreads. Revolution and war gave the French people a strong sense of national identity. In earlier times, people had felt loyalty to local authorities. As monarchs centralized power, loyalty shifted to the king or queen. Now the government rallied sons and daughters of the revolution to defend the nation itself. Nationalism, a strong feeling of pride in and devotion to one's country, spread throughout France. The French people attended civic festivals that celebrated the nation and the revolution. A variety of dances and songs on themes of the revolution became immensely popular. By 1793, France was a nation in arms. From the port city of Marseille, troops marched to a rousing new song. It urged the children of the fatherland to march against the bloody banner of tyranny. The song, La Marseillaise, would become the French national anthem. Revolutionaries pushed for social reform. Revolutionaries pushed for social reform and religious toleration. They set up state schools to replace religious ones and organized systems to help the poor, old soldiers, and war widows. With a major slave revolt raging in the colony of Saint Dominique, or Haiti, the government also abolished slavery in France's Caribbean colonies. Checkpoint: what changes occurred in France because of the French Revolution? That's the end of section 3. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.